question. Okay, good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Giles Claydon, and I'm the Deputy Programme Manager supporting Keith Clark on the MHHS programme. And I have been probably on the programme for the last 6 months and been very heavily involved in the latest round of replanning over the last quarter that's been taking us into round 3. Joe, if we could go on to the next slide, please. So just in terms of the agenda today, and just to make a couple of introductions up front, I will hand over in a minute to Jenny Booth, who I'm sure many of you will know from Ofgem, just to give us a sponsor message from their perspective in terms of the importance of round 3 and where that sits. I'm then going to hand over to Keith Clark, who I'm sure probably doesn't need any introduction whatsoever from the previous rounds, who will then take us through the round 3 objectives, excuse me, and the overall approach towards round 3. The agenda will then come back to me, where I'll talk you through the high-level programme plan, how each of the phases fit together. And then I'm going to hand over to each of our SME leads to talk you through each of the phases that we have in the programme, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves as we get to that point in the agenda. Throughout
Giles, just before we go on, I've just noted Ewan's question on recording.
Sorry, missed that. I was about to come onto the recording.
It is recording because I can see stop recording.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come back to that in a minute. So where do we get to? So yeah, I'll ask each of the leads to introduce themselves as we get to each of their respective phases. Throughout the agenda, I think we found it more productive to take questions as we go along, as opposed to have a major Q&A session at the end. But there is time at the wrap up for just any wash up questions, depending on how we get on through the agenda. We will take them at that stage. But as we go through this morning, we will pause and take questions at suitable points and junctures in the presentation. Itself is essentially drawn from the implementation approach document that I imagine many of you have seen in the round 3 artifacts. There are a few updates and amendments, and we're in this presentation here, which we'll point out to you as we go through. One or two of them are a few errors that we've had fed back to us, so we just want to clarify those to avoid confusion as you work your way through the R3 artifacts. And we've also added some additional information into this pack just to address some of the consistent themes of questions that have come through already. You will note, as the conversation just had, that we are recording this. This will be put up onto the collaboration portal probably later today or possibly early Monday. I am just mentioning that because at the end of this Teams session, you will see a link to a Teams recording, but I'm afraid because it sits behind our firewalls, you won't be able to get access to the recording. So please wait until that's published. All we do is get a whole load of access requests that we won't be able to accept. So it will be up there, and the materials are similar to previous playback sessions that are already up there. So if there is anything desperate that you want to look at from today's session before today's actually gets published, you could possibly go back through one of the other sessions that are already on the portal. So I think that is all I want to say at this point. We've got an hour and a half set aside for this meeting. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jenny Booth for the sponsor message. Over to you, Jenny.
Great, thank you, Giles. Good morning, everyone. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Jenny Booth. I'm head of HHS in Ofgem. This programme, as you know, is one of a key and a number of programs that are helping us transition to net zero over the coming years. As such, it is a flagship program for Ofgem and for BEIS. BEIS in particular see this as a enabling program for a raft of other strategic activities they would like to deliver through the retail market. So they do have a healthy interest in this program being implemented as soon as possible. That said, specific to this planning activity, we do want a robust, credible, and the fastest plan we could possibly get to actually implementing the new HHS arrangements. And therefore, I would encourage all participants to actively and effectively participate in these playback sessions and to respond with the appropriately granular detail to help the program actually come up with a credible plan that parties can buy into. The plan is going to come to Ofgem for approval, and we will be quite keen to ensure that the plan has been gone through a rigor and a rigorous assessment and analysis to justify the timeframes that are presented, partly to present that to our internal senior management who understand BEIS's keen interest, and also where we engage with BEIS to make sure that we can actually defend the plan when it comes to us and actually justify the timelines that are there. So I would really encourage all participants to work collaboratively with the program to get the information in a timely way, and hopefully we will come out with a plan that is deliverable for all and help us actually implement this program in the best way possible. If people have got questions, I'm free to answer them right now. Thank you, Giles. Thanks all.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Any questions for Jenny before we move on? Okay, thank you, Jenny. We'll move on, please. So we're now going to move on to the round 3 objectives and approach. It's over to you, Keith.
Good morning, everybody. So just to reinforce the comments at the top of the slide and Jenny's comments, we all know that the planning process needs to come up with a realistic plan. And actually, you know, we want to do this replanning consultation with yourselves, with industry. This program is its ambition is to be different and to be very engaged and to take a certain amount of input and lead from industry. So it's really important that we get your inputs in relation to this plan that we've put out. The objectives for round 3 are to consult on this plan, but also to get understanding from you about your current DBT plans. We will come back to PSG to sign off finally and unconditionally the M3 milestone based on evidence that participants have their DBT plans, or at least their timelines. So we are keen to get your responses, including your delivery plans, as evidence for where you are in DBT and how long you think your DBT will take. We also wish to assess interest in SIT participation from these responses, and we're quite heartened by the fact that in conversations we've been having with participants, including suppliers, we're getting quite a reasonable level of interest in SIT participation, which is good to know. So the deadlines for the consultation are, as you know, the end of January is the final deadline, the 31st of January. We have asked for participants who are particularly keen to demonstrate readiness and appetite for SIT to respond by the 16th. But as we've made very clear, if you reply between the 16th and 31st, you won't be precluded from consideration for SIT. If we can move on to the next slide, Jeff, thanks. The implementation approach, which Giles briefly mentioned earlier, is new to round 3, and this is the slide deck from which a lot of the content today will be derived. But this is to give you a more pulled together helicopter view of the plan and how it works end to end, which we hope will provide good context for your understanding of the more detailed artifacts. And we do ask you to look not just at the plans on pages, but actually the more detailed planning information, because a lot of the information that you may be asking questions about is actually in the documentation, but these playbacks are to try and bring it to the surface. So, hopefully after the end of the session, you'll have a better understanding of this, but do please look at the detailed artifacts, because they are quite comprehensive and much more fulsome than was the case in round 1 and round 2. Round 1 and round 2 were more to do with getting everybody familiar with the plan and the thinking and the assumptions we've been making. Round 3 is much more specific, but there will continue to be questions in relation to the delivery approaches, some of which are still assumed in the round 3 plan, but this quarter will be much more falling into line with working group discussions that will be happening in January, February, March. Particularly, for example, the SIT working group, the qualification working group, and the migration working group. We want the plan, when it's eventually re-baselined, to be in line with and to be following the detailed consensus across industry experts through those governance forums. So the ideal situation is that the working groups have consensus on the more detailed delivery approaches, and the re-baseline plan can fall into line with those conversations. So our plea is not only to respond to round 3, but also to make sure that you are properly represented in those working groups. We've also made the consultation questions, we think, a lot easier for you to respond to, in this case being an online form. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, but the important thing is that you are obligated to reply to this, to respond to this consultation. We will also be monitoring that and reporting the compliance and non-compliance in relation to this to programme steering group, in the same way as we recently did for the readiness assessment 2, and as we will continue to do for most things where the programme is asking for industry to engage and respond, because, as I say, this is supposed to be, and our ambition is, this is an industry programme, and therefore we can't really operate in a different and better way if we don't get sufficient inputs from you. Giles, that's it for me.
Sorry, I was talking into mute. Thanks, Keith. Any questions for Keith before we move on to the high-level programme plan? Okay, so if we could move on, please, Joe. So what I wanted to do in this section is just to spend a few minutes talking you through the overall plan on a page, and how the programme plan fits together. Now, this slide here, you've probably seen a slightly different version to this in the implementation approach. And there are just a couple of amendments in here, which I will just point out to you. There's a couple of corrections and one addition. You'll see on the top of the slide, we've got quite a sort of a broad blue swim lane right at the top there, setting out the milestones. In the implementation approach, there was a mistake where we forgot to amend milestone 11 and 12 to read 18 months. I think it read 1 year in the original. So that is updated just to make it consistent to the timelines that you would have seen below, but we're just correcting it here to avoid any confusion. The other date as well, and I'll talk about this a bit more, is around CP3, which is the box at the top right-hand quadrant there, where I think we had July 25 in there originally. We have corrected that again in line with the chart on the left, just to bring that to September 25. So again, that just aligns with the timelines. I'm afraid oversights on our part. The one addition in here, which is new, is in the middle of this. You'll see a kind of a very narrow swim lane, which is sort of off red burgundy type colour. That actually sets out or elevates from the MPP just an activity relating to non-SIT LDSO testing, which we know needs to be completed before the first participants migrate. What we've done is just moved it into this high-level POAP to really stress the point that we're aware that all LDSOs nationally to achieve this plan will need to have passed through or testing which provides equivalence to qualification by the point of the first participants going live. So in terms of this diagram, what we are trying to show here is that there are effectively 3 kind of defining critical paths that go through this plan, as shown here. The first of those is the critical path, which is shown by the line broadly on the left here, which is a quite heavy dashed line, and that shows the fastest route to achieve migration. That is based around the formation of a minimum viable cohort. Now, Dom Mooney, when we come on to the next section, we'll talk more about the minimum viable cohort, but this is the minimum composition of participants that we need in order to fully prove and functionally exercise the design of the central systems. And a major focus during this consultation is to seek the interest in SIT from participants, and therefore for us to get assurance that we can actually within those SIT participants be sure that we've got a subset there that can exercise all parts of the central system. The next, and I should say that the MVC path does present the fastest route into migration, because if you elect to do SIT, then you will not have to go through qualification as well. There is equivalence between those two testing activities. The next path through this is the alternative route of coming into the programme through the qualification route. And what the middle critical path shows there is the path taken by those participants that are relatively advanced in their DBT activities, their design, build and test activities, but choose not to elect for SIT, but are really ready to go into qualification the earliest. And this shows the effective path for those participants that elect to go into qualification early and form the first tranche of qualification. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The final critical path on here, the full red line, CP1, if you're looking at the key as well, is to the purest amongst you the critical path through the programme as a whole. And that represents the last tranche going through qualification and then into migration, and then onwards and into reaching the new settlement code in 2027, which of course is the primary objective of or end goal of the programme. So that's just a very quick overview of why we're representing these critical paths. I think important to note that the gap between the MVC critical path and the middle critical path there essentially represents the first mover advantage for those that choose to elect for SIT and then can go into migration the earliest. And really, we think that will give those participants first mover advantage in the marketplace and exploit some of the benefits that moving over to the half-hourly settlement can offer, particularly in customer propositions and offerings. So turning to each of the phases, I'm going to start off with the grey swim lane about a third the way down. This is really where the focus is on the programme at the moment. We're working very closely with 5 central parties in order to really monitor and start assuring the design, build, and ultimately the test stages of those 5 parties. Through the consultation that we're going through, that community will be extended once we've identified and recognised those participants that wish to enter into SIT. And the main focus of this stage at present is to really provide as much support, guidance, and help to get those parties and the essential parties and the SIT parties into a state to enter component integration as the first starting phase of SIT testing. The main exit point for those participants will be pre-integration testing, PIT testing, which we'll talk about a bit more in detail shortly. But that's the exit point that all those participants need to achieve before they can enter into the SIT testing phase. So having achieved a successful pass at PIT, those participants can then go into component integration testing and then pass through all the various SIT the SIT testing phases that you see here, and I'm not going to go into those in detail because we'll cover those off a bit more when we get to that section. But probably worth just highlighting that the main element on the critical path here is the SIT functional testing, which is formed in 3 cycles. We are very heavily focused on getting through that as quickly as possible in order to prove the functional design that can then stand up the qualification environment or the UX environment in order to enable qualification to commence, probably for the majority of participants through the program. So that's a major focus for us in SIT. So just to step back one stage, I've also spoken previously about the need for the LDSOs to perform testing that provides equivalence to qualification. The exact details of that are being worked through the working groups, but they also need to conclude that stage of testing by the point that the MVC concludes SIT testing as well, in order to then enable migration to commence. So moving on further down is the light blue box. We've got qualification, and qualification is effectively run over a 12-month period. You've heard me talk about tranches as I was giving the initial part of this overview. This comprises of 7 tranches, and notionally they are each lasting approximately 6 months. And then we've added on probably a month or 2 either end of that to top and tail it, to take account of the governance that will need to take place around that, with the performance assurance board managed by Lexon essentially providing the governance on entry and exit. Our plan here is based on assumptions which have been worked up in close consultation with the code bodies to date. They are likely to get refined, and as probably somebody may already recognise, actually we're at slight arm's length from the code bodies, and there needs to be a degree of independence. But at the moment, the assumptions that underpin this plan are deemed to be sensible, and Jason will talk a bit more about that as we get onto the qualification section. Moving on further down, we've got regulatory and code drafting activities. The shape of this plan probably suggests to you that none of these are on the critical path. The only area I do just want to point out is the need for us to fully sign off the code before we start the formal migration at M11. Moving on, lastly, down to migration. This is quite a change in terms of the time frame here from what you may recall from round 2. We've extended the window for migration out to 18 months, and that's based on modelling that we've done during the round 3 workup phase. So that's now 18 months. We've left the window open at 12 months for the participants as they roll off qualification to achieve their full migration of MPANs, and that concludes in the sort of the last quarter, October timeframe of 2026. We've then got a minimum of 2 months there, allowing the systems to settle and stabilise before we look to implement the new settlement code, probably in a window that's no more than 6 months to start that off at the start of 2027. And again, Jason will just talk a bit more about the dynamics around how we move from migration to new settlement when we get there. I think I'm going to stop there. We're going to go into this plan in more detail in the next sections, but hopefully that just gives you a bit of an overview and a sense about how each of these phases fit together. Are there any questions before we go on the plan as a whole?
Giles, I was just going to make the point that you mentioned there were a couple of corrections on this slide. I just wanted to say that the underpinning planning documents we sent out were correct. It's just this one slide representation that had a couple of tweaks. So I would ask people, as I said earlier, to go past POAPs and look at the detailed plans. It's really important that you do interrogate the documents properly as well to make sure that you fully understand the plan. These representations help you lead into the understanding of the plan, but they're not sufficient for you to be able to respond with a quality response in round 3.
Thank you, Keith. And for those of you with very good eyesight, you'll see there's a box in red at the top here. That's just to highlight the changes that we've made, and you'll see that we have similar boxes like that on other slides as well. So there is we have tried to call out where we made some minor amendments to the original documents. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on, and I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to talk us through the design and build phase. Paul, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Pettit. I head up the LDP SI design team. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just to give you a brief update what we're doing and how we're looking to basically support and help you in these design, build, and test phases. Just as a bit of background, hopefully most of you are aware that the design is reaching conclusion with regards to the work-off plan, and that's all going to the design advisory group on the 1st of February for approval. Those artifacts will then be basically, the design will be baselined, and I think on the 8th of February everything is planned to be uploaded to the collaboration base. In parallel to that, we're augmenting that design and those artifacts by basically providing a number of views that will hopefully support you in your design, build, and test by basically enabling you to look at the design with a lens as a supplier, an LDSO, etc., and help you understand where you sit in the overall target operating model. As I said, we're there to support you through this phase. We're also doing, we've finished an exercise of basically doing a design assurance, that was concluded in October. We're looking at doing participant design assurance, and it's nothing to be worried about. It's basically, we're going to be basically working with you, setting up a series of meetings to basically take you through and for us to get an understanding of where you are in the development process and the design process. So it's about, have you correctly identified your processes, your interfaces, where your role is within the TOM, etc., and looking basically to support you, but also give the program an independent view of readiness, because primarily we want this to be a success, and through PIT, your testing, and into SIT, we want those sessions and those testing phases to go as seamless as possible. So we'd like to get an understanding of where you are. If you've got challenges, questions, etc., look to address those. We have the design mailbox, and I think some of you have been using that already. And my team is already looking at, and we've been responding to queries that have come in. But in summary, we're there to basically help you. We are going to basically pull together a review, an independent view of readiness from a design assurance point of view, and we'll feed that back into the team. But there'll be guidance documents coming out in February to basically just cover that stuff off. But the design mailbox at design@mhhprogram.co.uk is there, and it will continue to basically to be there throughout these phases, and we'll be sitting there waiting to help you. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer those, but at this point I'll hand over to Nigel to take you through the detail of DBT 1 and 2.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, my name's Nigel Hunt. I work in the SI test team. I'm going to talk you through the T part of DBT, the testing part. So, DBT1 is done by all. DBT is a subset of those participants. DBT1 covers all, I think as Paul has alluded to, all the sort of the testing, all the requirements that are held in the RTM, whereas DBT2 is required to sort of look at the sort of back-end systems and consequential change. DBT1 primarily has to be complete for entry into CIT. It's just for clarity, it's a requirement for all, whether it goes through the SIT route or the qualification route. But both of these are. DBT1, we will provide, and we are going to provide a pre-qualification guidance or PIC guidance that's due out at the end of this month. And that's been worked alongside the co-delivery bodies. We're building out at the moment. We'll get their input and their support on that, and then that will come out, and that will support that sort of PIT part of DBT. For clarity, the testing is the last part of DBT. It's the last part of the participants' testing. Would you like to go on to the next, Joe? Go on to the next slide, please. So PIT, I think I've described roughly what it is, but let's just go through the sort of lower level details of this. So PIT is, as I said, it's a responsibility of each individual party. It includes functional, non-functional, and any related regression, again, as based on the RTM. So the requirements that Paul will support you with, making sure you understand those to support your build. And as I say, this is the back end, the testing part of it. It's responsible of each individual party to have their own systems, their own test environments and data, scenarios and scripts. You can use your own test processes and your own test management tool, including defect management process. We will assure and support this from a SIP perspective, and the co-delivery bodies from a qualification perspective, the assurance of the key deliverables, PIT approach and test plan. It's got the RTM here. It's the RTTM. It should read. So it's not the RTM that Paul's talked about. It's the test part of that. So the sort of test scenarios mapping back to those requirements. We'll assure your PIT assurance, scenarios and test scripts. We'd expect a regular execution progress report as you go through your testing cycles for entry into SIT. The PIT guides will give a bit more detail on what that is and what we expect in that. And similarly with the PIT and the keyword, the PIT test completion report, this must be completed to demonstrate that you've completed your testing and are available to go into SIT. And again, from co-delivery body's perspective, enter into qualification. That was it from a PIT perspective, high level. Any questions for me? If not, thank you very much.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Nigel. So I'm going to hand over to Dom.
Morning, everyone. For those of you that I haven't met yet, I am the Systems and Integration Test Lead on the programme. And I'm going to give you an overview on the SIT testing phase and also talk you through the timeline for the testing as well. So the system integration testing will follow two core elements. So as Nigel's just been discussing, a key entry criteria is actually going to be evidenced pre-integration testing. And I won't repeat what Nigel's gone through there. But participants are going to be expected to produce the deliverables that were described, but also leading into the commencement of SIT, if you're participating, we'll also be expecting a readiness report as well, which not only will look at the PIT completion, but also look at environment readiness, test data that's been allocated and verified, and any test steps that have been produced for your particular systems in support of the overarching scenarios and scripts that will be produced by the SI. So the SI will assure test readiness of SIT entrants. We'll be providing a test approach and plan and a test data approach and plan, both of which we'll be developing in the working groups. We'll be specifying the scenarios and scripts for SIT for each party, and this will be based on the design. We've mentioned that we'll verify the PIT exit criteria has been met prior to the entry to SIT. And during the execution, we'll also be assuring the SIT test execution results. In addition, we'll also be coordinating the availability of relevant test harnesses test environments, and the appropriate data which each PP can test against within SIT. And then during the actual testing itself, we'll be managing the SIT process and schedule, and we'll be providing access and training to the MHHS test management tool, which is going to be ADO. And we'll also provide overall defect and issue management for all centrally raised issues, including the triage, and that will also incorporate any issues relating to environments. So in terms of the SI deliverables that will be produced, so I've mentioned the approaches and plans. We'll be also producing an overarching SIT stage readiness report. So every participant that provides a readiness report will then aggregate that into an overall report, which will go through formal assurance and governance ahead of the testing start. And then at the end of each testing stage, we'll be issuing completion reports. And for guidance, we'll also provide a defect management plan and a test management tool user guide, along with the training materials for that. Joe, if you don't mind moving us on, please. So as we mentioned earlier, at the core of the SIT approach is a program construct called the minimum viable cohort. What this is we'll be asking for SIT volunteers, but during the execution, what we'll be doing is identifying a minimum viable cohort that, as a group, will enable us to exercise and execute the SIT coverage as quickly as possible. And why we're doing this is because we want to move at the pace of the fastest participants. And so we can accelerate the plan, execute the coverage as soon as possible, and then move on to the subsequent stages of the program. The MVC is going to consist of all the central systems, and then also St. Clements and IDNOs providing MPRS, IDNOs providing network operation services and UMSO services, and supplier agents. And then we'll also be including two of each of the different service provider types, and also at least two suppliers. As I mentioned, other SIT participants will also be included in the SIT phase. So although we'll be looking to execute that coverage as soon as possible, other participants will also be supported through the SIT phase for an extended period. And so, we believe that, there is an opportunity, if you do intend to volunteer for SIT, to actually get to market a little bit quicker. Obviously, you can get down the migration route faster. The approach principles there on the right-hand side, we've based on feedback, we've added a new slide, which I'm just going to flip to now, which hopefully is a little bit clearer in terms of the pathway into SIT and then how we manage that. So Keith mentioned the milestone for participants to inform the programme of their intention to volunteer. We are asking if we can get early sight on that by the 16th of January. That's great. But if you're unable to respond until the end of January, that's fine. That won't preclude you from SIT participation. Following the responses to the round 3 consultation, the programme will then assure delivery plans of those parties that have indicated their intention to participate in SIT, and then we'll be looking to confirm those SIT candidates by the 23rd of April. At this stage, there'll be no distinction between the MVC and other SIT participants, so it'll just be a group of participants. And then we will look to integrate participants into the first stage of SIT, which is SIT component integration testing. And what we're doing at the moment in the SIT working group is developing a progressive integration of participants into that component integration testing stage, starting first with the DIP and Helix, and hopefully MPRS, and then other roles progressively at 2-week intervals. Once we've then completed that SIT CIT phase, we won't be looking to incorporate any further participants into the SIT phase. And so as a consequence of those 2-week intervals, the last entrance into CIT is going to be the 29th of January 24. Then as we move into SIP functional, that's when we'll be looking to identify the minimum viable cohort. And that will be based on the criteria of the highest number of tests that have been successfully completed by that grouping that I discussed on the previous slides. And obviously we'll also be looking at the number of defects as well that are currently open. We'll then continue to maintain that MVC. It may be dynamic to a certain degree for some participants, where if some of the MVC fall behind due to valid reasons associated with defects or just general progression is slowed down, we may be able to swap other SIP participants into the MVC in order to maintain that pace. In the other SIT stages are SIT migration, SIT non-functional test, and SIT operational. They're all going to be executed in a separate environment. Again, we will maintain the pace of the fastest, so prioritizing the MVC test objectives on any given day. But we will provide continued support for other SIT participants to complete their coverage up until the 7th of April 25. And just to note, any SIT participant dropping out of SIT for any valid reasons would then need to proceed down the non-SIT route. But we are talking to the code delivery bodies at the moment regarding the credit of any execution that's been completed within SIT going towards your qualification. Joe, if you don't mind moving on to the next screen.
Yeah, I think Dom, I might just pause. You'll just go back one slide before we go on to the next one. I think thanks, Dom. That's a great overview. I think what I want to do is just to ask if there are any questions at this point. We've covered a lot of information to this point, particularly around SIT. And I just want to happy to take any questions or indeed comment back from anybody on the call as to whether this level of detail is useful and whether you've got any additional questions at this point. So I think we'll just pause there for a minute, see if there are any questions from anybody. Okay, I think there's a thumbs up, so that's good to know that it's at the right level. Okay, I don't see any hands up. We'll pause again after the next slide, which is a more detailed breakout of the SIT phases, because I think this is really key, and I think or hope it will help you make a decision really between the SIT and qualification paths as well. So we're really keen to sort of get this over in a very clear way to you all on this call. Dom?
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Joe. So what's represented here is a plan on the page of the SIT execution stages. So you can see on the left-hand side the various swim lanes for each test stage. So SIT CIT at the top, SIT functional, SIT migration, NFT, and ops. And then the bottom two swim lanes depicting non-SIT testing stages. So I'll come on to those in a moment. So prior to the start of SIT test execution, as I mentioned, we'll be looking to assess readiness of SIT participants. So that would be assuring PIT completion and also environment connectivity, test data loading and verification, code deployment, and also just generally whether your resources and your onboarding into the tools is complete. During that period for SIT CIT will be sorry, have we got a question there? I think
it was a comment. I'll read it. You carry on.
Yeah, sure.
I'll pick it up. Okay.
So following SIT CIT, we'll then move into SIT functional, which we've broken down into 3 cycles. The intention of the first cycle is going to be to execute as much of the coverage as possible, but obviously acknowledging that defects may have been flushed out and remain to be resolved. And so we're including a cycle 2 and 3 in the plan, which will be for resolution of defects and also any targeted regression. The aim is to then, as we just ahead of cycle 2 of functional, we'll be looking to start SIT migration testing. We've acknowledged in the plan that with the migration solution design still progressing, although I think it's due to close out quite soon, it may be that participants need to complete their migration PIT a little bit their migration pit a little bit later on, and so we'll assure that separately if that's what participants elect to do. We'll also incorporate just general readiness for each of those other stages. But the aim is that with SIP migration, a lot of that execution will be of a functional nature. And so we're aiming to get to a point by the 20th of October 24 where we're able to institute a code freeze for the core system because we've executed all of the coverage and resolved all the major defects. Subsequent to that, we'll run a phase of regression testing. And then in addition, once we've completed the MVC coverage, as I stated, we'll continue to support other participants to complete their coverage up until the 7th of April 25. And then in the swim lanes at the bottom, the non-sit testing. So we mentioned non-sit LDSO testing. So we do expect LDSOs to be part of the general SIT participation. But we've acknowledged subsequent to round 2 that we do need to bring forward non-SIT LDSO testing and complete that in order to meet the M10 and M11 milestones. And that will be running in parallel with the later stages of SIT. The code freeze is what will trigger the beginning of end-to-end sandbox execution. So end-to-end sandbox is basically in the UIT environment, and it is an opportunity for participants to run any additional testing, potentially complete their DBT2 testing requirements, and that will be supported for a period of time beyond the end of qualification testing. And once we've completed the coverage for the MVC, that will be the trigger point for commencing the qualification execution, which Jason will cover in subsequent slides. So I think Giles will pause again there. Just if there's any questions on that POPE, then happy to respond on that.
Thomas Marler, I was noticing your comment in the chat. Are there any areas of this that feel particularly hazy that we can maybe just recap on now at this point? Because I'm sure if there are, you may not be the only one.
Yeah, Giles, it's not necessarily that it's hazy. It's just that the slides are very populated with lots of points. So it's a lot to take in at once. So yeah. It will just take a lot of assessment to look over each step because there are a lot on these slides.
Sure. Okay. No, understood. I mean, if anybody else in here does have questions, and either feel free to, as I said at the start, to put your hand up, or indeed if you want to put the questions in the chat, I'm very happy to sort of chair them from my side as well.
Just to reiterate, we welcome everybody's attendance and input into the working groups. We've got the SIT working group up and running, qualification working group, and also the environments working group. And then for any data related elements, data working group, and then the migration working group as well. So that's a great opportunity to sort of get a deeper, more granular understanding of the various areas of the testing. But in addition, feel free to contact us through the PMO or the PPC, and we'll be happy to address any queries that you have.
Hi, is this presentation going to touch on DBT2? Because it seems a lot, the routes through DBT1, because they're quite service provider supported for a lot of suppliers, seem quite clear, perhaps, or reasonably clear, but it's just where DBT2 fits into all of this.
DBT1 is a requirement to enter testing, so it's a prerequisite for both SIT or qualification testing. DBT2, the requirement is basically to conclude that in line with your qualification exit. So Jason's going to talk about qualification and how what you need to complete if you go down the SIT route or the non-SIT route, and how we achieve the equivalence within SIT to enable your qualification. But in answer to your question, DBT2 is basically required as evidence for your successful qualification.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
I think that, you know, reflects some of the lessons learned from switching and some of the other programs as well, Colin. We don't have this big transition phase that the switching program had between UIT and Go Live, where you can do your consequential changes and your testing and everything associated with that. So we have to have some confidence that those consequential changes have been made and are at a suitable level of quality before we qualify you to go live into the market.
Yep, thanks.
Super. That's probably quite a nice handover, Giles.
Yeah, good segue.
Dom and myself. We didn't script that. Colin, well, you're not a plant, Colin. We didn't script that. So thank you.
I don't think I need to introduce you then, Jason. Over to you.
Yeah, hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jason Brogden. I work in the central program team here in the LDP. I'm particularly involved in qualification and code drafting, but across the program as a whole. So that lovely secateur in to talk about qualification. And I'll talk a bit about the timing a bit later, but as Dom has highlighted, the plan has the qualification testing process following SIT functional testing. And the reason for that dependency is to give us confidence in stability of the systems and the design, so that we can have confidence that when we go into qualification, we don't have a lot of regression testing to do in order to cover any defects or any issues that we might have found through SIT for the design and the functional areas particularly. So that's why we've got that dependency at the end of SIT functional, is to give us that confidence that we're executing qualification testing on a sound basis. And there are four main pillars of qualification testing. Those of you who've been through the qualification process in order to enter the market previously will know that there is a self-assessment document, and there's an element of procedural and governance processes that need to be followed for the individual codes in order to exceed and qualify to participate in the codes. So there's that procedural governance and more administrative element of completing your relevant documentation associated with assessment for qualification. The second part is PIT and evidence for PIT, which Dom covered earlier. As he said, it's the same prerequisite to enter qualification as we've got in SIT, and we're expecting you to have evidenced your DBT1 PIT testing to give us the confidence that you have stable systems to come into our qualification testing, and again, to mitigate against the risk of finding defects and issues and potential regression testing through the qualification process. So that gives us that confidence, and you that confidence as well. We've just talked about DBT2 testing, and as Dom said, that is an exit criterion from qualification. So where we have the self-assessment document, that's one of the tick boxes that we require, and we will be assuring the evidence of that DBT2 testing. And the fourth is the actual execution of qualification testing itself. And it says in here it's expected to be a subset of SIT coverage. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in SIT and what we're doing in qualification, just so that you can better understand the differences between the two. Because as has been trailed by probably everybody in this call so far now, we are looking for those suppliers who wish to participate in SIT to tell us in the Replan consultation response. So if I can set out the difference between qualification and SIT, hopefully that will help inform some of those decisions. So if SIT is there to test the end-to-end system processes and design for MHHS. So it gives us that confidence that the design baseline that we have produced is accurate, consistent, coherent, and able to be interpreted by participants in order to deliver that end-to-end, those end-to-end market arrangements. So we'll be defining end-to-end tests that run through all of the roles and responsibilities within MHHS. Qualification testing is focused on a role-by-role basis. So you will qualify as a role within MHHS, whether that's a supplier, smart data service, For network operators, it's for unmetered supplies operation. So it is on that role-by-role basis. So if you think about the requirements and the processes within the design baseline, we'll draw a circle around those on a role-by-role basis and test the functions, processes, and systems that are associated with those roles. And for you, for suppliers, that means we will be testing suppliers, and we will be qualifying suppliers and the interactions with the DIP. We will be testing and qualifying your service providers as well. So smart data services, advanced data services, UMS data services, and the metering services for advanced and smart. So that's the big difference between SIT and qualification. SIT is that end-to-end element. Qualification is just on a role-by-role basis. And we've put a subset of SIT coverage because we imagine that when we're doing end-to-end tests, there will be end-to-end tests that execute the same functionality multiple times to prove those end-to-end processes. So if we're looking on a role-by-role basis, then it might be that we only need to test that functionality, the processes and systems once for individual roles. So that's why we think it's expected to be a subset SIT coverage. Is that clear for everyone on the differences between SIT and qualification and what it looks like? I'm going to pause a bit just to see if we can get a bit of dialogue going if there are any issues. Okay. At the bottom of here, we do talk about, sorry, Joe, at the bottom, we do talk about the responsibilities a bit because the responsibility for qualification will sit with the code bodies. We will have a whole load of collateral we're providing as the program with all of the test scenarios from SIT and the scripts, data generators and test harnesses. And that will be there to draw on in defining qualification testing and also DBT2 testing and PIT, etc. But it will be the responsibility of the code delivery bodies to execute and finally sign off qualification. And that's right, because it's the performance assurance boards who have the responsibility for the robust and accurate operation of settlement. And it's them who will want to tick off that each of you are appropriate qualified and will not disrupt the market on entry into the MHHS arrangements. So it's quite important to pick out that responsibility and therefore, Elexon are looking at the development of the BSc qualification processes, RECCO looking at REC, and there's already a well-established process under SEC for the Smart Energy Code. So Joe, we'll move on to the timelines. Giles flagged these up earlier. There is a big bar at the top around qualification testing preparation, which is the building of the criteria, the test scenarios that we require for qualification, etc. There's a key milestone in there for the qualification testing approach and plan. That is due to be approved in May this year. And then there is the additional preparation activity. There's a number of more detailed activities set out in the detailed MPP plan. And as Keith said at the beginning, please don't just rely on these POAPs and our commentary here. Please do drop into the Microsoft project plan. We've also provided it in Excel format to help those of you who don't have MPP. So please do look at that next level down where you want to prod more into the plan. The qualification SAD process, that's that number one, the documentation process that needs to be gone through. We've got that starting in April 2024, and that follows the approval of the code drafting for qualification. So once the code drafting is approved, the code bodies know what they need to do for qualification, and we want to open that up to all of you to start that process as soon as possible. We know in the existing arrangements it can take months to go through that self-assessment documentation. So the longer lead time we give you to do that, the more chance that you have of success at the end of it. Qualification testing execution, as Dom said earlier, that drops off the end of SIT functional for that stable platform. We've got that running at the moment for 12 months with a 2-month period allowed for PAB approval and mobilization of your prod environments in order to start migration. So as Giles ran through on those critical paths earlier, for qualification, for the first tranche of qualification, we run through SIT non-functional, so we have that stable baseline. We start the qualification testing. That first tranche of qualification, we're assumed it takes 6 months, then 2 months for mobilization and PAB approval, then you can drop into migration. And that's the red path that that Giles covered earlier in the POAP. Apologies if I'm reiterating his commentary from earlier, but I think it's important to understand that. At the moment, we have 12 months set aside for qualification. That is our assumption on a practical timescale for qualification at the moment. We are testing and prodding and challenging that with Elexon and with RETCO and with DCC to check that that is a reasonable timescale. We think it will take 6 months to execute qualification. So we've got 7 tranches of 6 months that make up that 12-month period, because PAB sits on a monthly basis. So we can run the first tranche for 6 months, PAB can sit, you can mobilize prod, away you go. And then we can stagger that on a month-by-month basis so that it can feed into the PAB decision-making process, and we're staggering that decision-making. It might be that some parties can do it quicker, because they may have equivalents for testing, as Dom mentioned earlier. If you've got common software providers, if you've got common adapter services, you may have some equivalents that will enable you to go a bit quicker. But at the moment, we're assuming that that is a 6-month period, and that there are 7 tranches running through that qualification period. And that's what that PAB approval diamond is in there. And I think that that covers the assumptions that are underpinning qualification. I think that's my last slide. Dom, did you want to add something in on that?
Yeah, just wanted to highlight that participants that are going through SIT, their SIT execution will obviously play into the overall qualification, but just to highlight that SIT participants will still be expected to go through the procedural and governance element of qualification. But the working assumption at the moment is there won't be any further testing required in order to achieve that qualification.
It's a really good point. Joe, if you just move back a slide, sorry. So in terms of SIT participants, just to put it back into a context against this slide, and you're right, Dom, I should have covered that. So number 4, for those parties who've been through SIT, number 4 will be demonstrated by your SIT execution. Number 2 will be demonstrated by the PIT evidence that you've provided before you go into SIT. And the 2 remaining elements will be, you'll need to provide evidence of the DBT2 testing, as we discussed with Colin's prompt earlier, and you'll need to go through the administrative element that's in item 1.
Thanks, Jason.
So you're right. I'm forgetting my own spiel because I have covered that in previous playbacks. Thanks for the prompt, Dom. Hopefully that's clear for everyone. Slight pregnant pause.
Yeah, I just think any questions for Jason before we move on to the regulatory area. Again, just to reiterate, if you'd prefer to ask the question through the chat on here, just drop it in there. You know, we really welcome the questions because it always allows us to challenge whether the plan is complete as well from our perspective. So it gives us a really useful point of validation to receive questions. So yeah, we're keen to make this as discursive as we possibly can.
Well, maybe I'll follow up on my previous question.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I'm on a roll this morning. Again on the DBT2 and the in respect to the qualification testing, if you take an example of a supplier, I mean, suppliers will have lots of different CRM systems, for example, and I think it might be the case where you've got a certain number of suppliers who are using common DIP adapters, so that kind of DBT1 PIT SIT type thing is fairly well covered. But then you might have more variety amongst the CRM solutions, and because the CRM solutions are not program deliverables as such, in that they're not, they're not core to the interfacing with industry systems, how will the program set a kind of common standard for the testing of, say, those kind of systems like CRM, where there won't be a set of industry tests necessarily around those? How will the qualification for that work?
So this is where I'll come back to sort of my colleagues' very unashamed plugs for our working groups, Colin. So the place where that will be discussed will be in the qualification working group, because that's where we will have to define what we expect from you for DBT2 testing.
Okay.
At the moment, we're making some broad assumptions on the best basis of our best understanding at the moment, whilst we develop those arrangements further through the working groups.
Okay, thanks for that. Cheers.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully you'll be able to find the time to attend the qualification working group, because it is a really important working group for all of you who won't be going through SIT. In fact, all of you will be going through SIT. We're still going to have those additional requirements that aren't covered, as we said earlier, particularly DBT2 and the assessment element.
Okay, thanks for that.
No problem. And we are supporting the Elexon performance assurance team in helping pulling together the content behind each of those bullets.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I don't know if are there any more questions on qualification. No, I think we ought to move on, Jason. Actually, onto regulation and code drafting.
Yeah, I'll move on to the code drafting. So we are a design-led program, and therefore we are in the process of completing the baselining of the design. We have baselined the design at M5. We have some work-off plans that we're currently developing at the moment off the back of that M5 baseline, and we're developing the design associated with migration. But that design baseline, that design baseline will set out the requirements for participants, and it's that design baseline that is your reference point for design, build, and test, and will be our reference point for testing and qualification. The code drafting can follow, because we're using that design baseline for our developments and DBT activities. So the code drafting is running. It's just started. It's running now. We have started the drafting required for the balancing and settlement code, the retail energy code, Decusa and CUS, the distribution and transmission connection and use of system agreements, and that I'll talk a bit about how we've split this up into topic areas. So the program is drafting the BSC code drafting. RECCO is drafting the REC, and Decusa and CUSC are drafting their own constituent arrangements. There is one significant change from round 2 of the consultation to round 3, and that is off the back of program change request 12. Change request 12 approved that code drafting for consequential change items should be included within the code drafting for the program. And that's actually it's a good outcome for industry, because what that means is that where there are consequential impacts on the code that might otherwise have been defined separately, and then we have to find a way of combining it at the end through governance that's running through code bodies and governance that's running through the program. Now all of that comes together in one consolidated code drafting activity, and you have one baseline at the end of it that gives you clarity around how we have translated the design and consequential solutions into the constituent codes. So that is a good thing from visibility and consistency and coherency of the code baseline for industry. So I'll just move on to the next slide, Joe, if I can, because that covers the constituent topics that we have identified. So there are a number of different topic areas. This is how we're breaking up the work for our code development. And again, I'll pick out the change for this time around, and that is topic area I, which is consequential change. That is a new topic area we did not previously have in the round 2 baseline. And as a consequence, that has pushed the end date for code drafting, M6, back from February to April 2024 in the latest iteration of this plan. So the round 3 plan has M6 in April. Now, that is not an issue for the programme as a whole, because code drafting does not sit on the critical path, because all the DBT and testing activities are driven from the design baseline. We're not waiting for code. So that's good. But the key dependency from M6 in the overall plan is into that qualification, self-assessment documentation, the procedural element. So once we've baselined the code drafting at M6, we know what we're going to be assessing for qualification. Therefore, you as participants can start filling in the forms to run through that accession process, and we make that available as soon as possible. The next slide in here is just a generic development and review life cycle for those topic areas. So it shows how we are going to consult with industry as part of the code drafting. So we would really like you to engage with our code drafting activities, because ultimately these will be the obligations that you will be obliged under license and code to deliver against. So there is the opportunity for all industry parties to provide comments against code drafting as part of an industry-wide consultation in that development window. So everybody has the opportunity to provide comments against the code obligations that ultimately you'll have to sign up to. And I think that is my last slide, Joe, before I hand back over to one of my colleagues again. I'm going to pause there, and I'm quite happy to take questions and comments back on qualification if anyone has them, or to pick up on code drafting. The point of us being a design-led program and running from the design is a really important one. It's the design baseline that sets what you build against, and we don't have to wait for the code. So it's it's not like traditional BAU code modification world. We are running in a program mode here. Any questions or comments or anything you want to pick up before I hand over to Aid?
No,
Can't see
like it's
anything
me
coming.
next.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
No problem. Thanks,
Aid.
everyone.
Okay,
Aid, over to you.
Good morning, just everybody. My name's Adrian Page. I lead the overall SI function within the half-hourly programme, and I wanted to give you a brief update on migration activity and go live activity in the last few remaining minutes of this call. So having completed either that SIP path or the qualification path we've just spoken about, energy suppliers and their agents are in a position to start migrating their MPANs off the old settlement timeline into the new world. Now, to do that, we've given some brief outlines within the implementation approach, but the main thing we're doing is driving this through the working groups as per other areas where you're all very welcome to participate, and we debate and talk about the approach we're taking and any particular risks or issues and assumptions that we're making at the moment. In the migration space, there's two in particular that we use. One, as per the bottom right of that slide, is the migration design. So that's been developed at the migration design subgroup. That's been up and running for the last couple of months, led by John Wiggins. And as it says on the tin there, they're looking at the design, and reverse migration is in there as well, with a target to complete that and have that design baselined for the end of Q1 this year. The other meeting that we use is the migration working group. We had the last one of these yesterday, and in here we're taking that design and looking at what that means from an actual migration approach perspective. And this is where I would highlight on here the distinction at the bottom half of this slide between what the participants are doing and what the program is doing. So the participants need to ensure they've got clean data and on their MPANs, then they will be the ones migrating their MPANs. And what we're doing from a central perspective is trying to provide an open environment so people can migrate as and when they are ready to, We're also doing some work looking at what's the incentives or on the other end, what would be the penalties for not migrating, and how we can work to try and create an environment where it's in everyone's interest to migrate and to get on with moving into the new settlement solution there. So those are the two working groups, and as I say, encourage you to come along to those. That's where this gets developed, and it's developed across industry on a collaborative basis. To help with that, if we move on to the next slide, to try and help look at what we think would be a reasonable timeline for migration, we did some high-level modelling at the end of last year and agreed this through the migration working group. And this is what's driven that change from 12 to 18 months that Giles referred to at the start of this session when we looked at the plan on a page. And just to briefly highlight what's on here, the migration goes through 3 key stages. There's initial ramp up where we're making sure all the processes and systems that energy suppliers have got are interfacing through to enable that migration to commence. This will be parties who've been through SIT. This will be around, we're expecting there to be approximately 5 million MPANs available to start that migration in the first half a dozen months. That will get determined further, that assumption, as we get to see who's wanting to do SIT, and we can verify that and or adjust it accordingly. And also, as per the discussion earlier, we want to make sure all LDSOs are there, so we don't have to have any sort of geographic restrictions on where migration can occur. That would follow a period of full-scale ramp up and people migrating across at high volume. That would be both the people who've been through SIT, MVC, people who've been through SIT, non-MVC, and the people coming through from those tranches on qualification that Jason's just walked us through. And that would probably take us to around about 95% of MPANs migrated. Experience tells me there's always a tail to migration. There's always some, inverted commas, dirty data that means that those MPANs are harder to migrate. And those final months are to get those last few percentage across to take us through to that completion of migration at M15. If we just take one step further on the pack, please, Joe. From a timescale perspective, that 18 months is shown in the first of the 2 blue bars there highlighted at the bottom. And just to be clear with people, what we're seeing is after SIT, the first people have been able to start migrating in April 25. They will be the MVC people, followed in the following few months by people coming through from a non-MVC SIT perspective, and they've got the full window there of the 18 months to migrate. 6 months later, we will start to see the first people coming through qualification to migrate, and they've got the 12-month window there from September 25 to migrate. And as each tranche comes through, they'll have 1 less month to migrate. So certainly from a migration perspective, and to give people the longest time to migrate, the earlier there, if you go through SIT or early qualification, you've got the longest timeline to migrate. And I would just ask Jason if he wants to just comment about the box at the bottom there on M16 next, which is the transfer over to the new MHHS settlement timeline.
Yeah, thanks, Aid. This is another change from the round 2 replan. In the round 2 replan, M16, as Aid said, is the transition to the new settlement timetable. So the reduced settlement timetable to final reconciliation at 4 months rather than 14 months. So in round 2, that was set to 2 months after the migration had completed, on the basis that we felt that there would be stability in the systems and processes to allow us to migrate at that point. We had a discussion with the Elexon team, who ultimately, the Elexon operational team are responsible for the operations of the settlement agents and the settlement arrangements as a whole. And they weren't comfortable with it being totally time bound, and nor were we, actually. So what we've done in this plan is we've said that the approach to transition to the new settlement timetable will be on the basis of a set of criteria that we will define to give us confidence of stability of the new arrangements. Now that we might be confident that is met 2 months after migration. So we've put an opportunity for M16 to happen 2 months after the end of migration. It might mean that it takes longer to get those criteria met and a level of stability that we would expect in the new arrangements. So we've allowed for a 6-month window for that M16. So rather than being a time driven, we've allowed it to be driven by the criteria and stability in the new arrangements, with a backstop of 6 months, because we believe that anything longer than 6 months we will be incurring significant parallel costs, and it has other consequential impacts across running 2 different settlement timetables in parallel. So we've set it out as a window of 6 months from 2 months after the end of migration to give us that flexibility to approve the new settlement timetable according to those stability criteria. So that's why that's changed in the latest replan.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Got 5 minutes of the call left, so just wanted to one final slide really. As MPANs are migrated into the new world, they'll initially operate on the old timetable and then onto the new. Recognise that in that world, though, we need to make sure we've got service management in place to deal with any issues that come up on system performance. And each of the individual parties, it's up for them to have a service management model in place, and we're then making sure that across the environment as a whole, everything is picked up and there's no gaps, etc., and working particularly with Alexa on that. And recognise as well, bullet point on the second point there, that when we're doing that migration, there is likely to be additional activity that could create issues, and particularly when you think about the reverse migration occurring in that period as well. So we're expecting there to be some sort of enhanced level of support potentially needed during that period. But this is the final slide in here, and I didn't say actually all these slides are as per the implementation approach, so they're all outlined in the replan work that went out. Conscious of a couple of minutes, so any questions on migration and the operational support there, or shall I just hand back to you, Giles, to do a final check on any questions and to wrap up?
Just ask, are there any questions on anything that Aide's covered before we wrap? Don't see any hands going up. Okay, well, it just leaves me to thank everybody on this call for your time this morning. I know we've taken a significant portion of your morning, but I hope that fairly quick run through each of the phases of the programs has been useful and will be helpful as you respond to the round 3 consultation. I think, as we mentioned as we've been through the call, the question, we really welcome your questions. So I know we haven't had that many as we've been through this, but as and when you manage to really review and cover and maybe go back through this recording, if you've got more questions, please do submit them back to us within the artifacts. The PMO email address is given there. We'll receive those and we'll fire them out to the relevant SMEs across the team to respond. All the information from this morning will, as I mentioned, be published on the collaboration base. And just to reiterate my plea at the start, you will see a link come up on the Teams chat in a minute. That won't work, so please don't seek access. We will put everything up on the portal as soon as we can over the next day. So I think if there's nothing else, I'm going to close the call there and wish everybody a good rest of Friday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.